Okay, you can go ahead, Sheikh.
Okay, inshallah. This is the class say 5 actually. You have to correct it.
Okay, okay, I'll correct it.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya wal Mursaleen. Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. Wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Ya Allah, teach us that which is beneficial for us and bless us in the knowledge you have granted us and increase our knowledge. Brothers and sisters, it's my pleasure, honor to welcome you to another episode. It is the last in this semester, inshallah. This is about Muhammad al Ghazali. He is he cannot be described in few words. He is the scholar par excellence, the revivalist, the mujaddid, the mujahid, the mentor, the teacher, and the excellent orator and the prolific author. There are you can describe him in so many terms, and still you will not be able to do justice to this great personality. So let us join me in the, as we go over some of his great contributions, his life and great traits and contributions and legacy, so that we can inspire ourselves to study this religion and excel in its practices, inshallah. So these are the topics I'm going to briefly cover: milieu, origins and education, career, works, reformist ideas, legacy, and words of wisdom. Actually, all of those things that we described when we studied about Muhammad Abdul Daraz in the last session, and as well as Muhammad Iqbal and Muhammad Asad, these individuals were born into the same milieu, facing the same, nurtured in the same, you know, milieu and influences, because every personality, every thinker, no one, acts in a vacuum. Everybody is born into a milieu. There is a nature and nature or nurture. Both of these aspects complement and support each other. So he was born into a milieu of competing ideological rivalries and schisms in Egypt and all over the Muslim world, following that colonial invasions into the Muslim countries, including Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, Sudan, and all those countries we have mentioned. So, in the wake of this colonial incursions into the Muslim countries, there arose a group of self styled intellectuals, such as Arab nationalists, who claim, instead of harking back into the Islamic past, they want to make a new identity for the Arabs as Arabs. Many of the founders of this movement were Christian Arabs who did not want to associate with the, of course, they are proud of the Islamic past, but as an Arab past actually. So they want to detach Islam and make an identity for Arabs without Islam. And secularists who want to detach religion from politics, they are following the model of the Westernization model where, you know, because of the European specific nature of the European history, the struggle between church and scientists, they structured the society detaching religion from the state. That kind of tradition cannot be applied to the Islamic milieu, where there is no such wedge between religion and science, because in an Islamic tradition, science flourished. In Islam, there was nothing like Inquisition and nothing like persecuting scientists. There is nothing like that in the entire history of Islam. and so-called progressives, all of them, the self-styled intellectuals, a new generation, they are targeting the Quran and mocking the Islamic beliefs, and even, mocking at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Islamic symbols. But in response to this, inspired by the great ideas of Afghani, Abdu, and others, a new generation of Muslim intellectuals stood up to respond to these challenges and show the real superiority of Islam. And they were well grounded in the Islamic sciences, as well as they had a good grasp of the modern situation in the modern sciences. We mentioned this in the case of Raz, and inshallah, we will have another time to review some of the excellent ideas and contributions of Raz, inshallah, because he's a personality that deserves a more deeper study, inshallah. They call for a reform of Islamic tradition. They critique the superstitions and corrupt practices that have crept into the body politics of Muslims, of Islam and Muslims over the course of centuries. And they wanted to present the beauty of Islam as a coherent vision and as a model and the outline for restructuring the societies to resolve all those issues, clear the confusion and the corruption that is rampant. They proposed a new method of studying the sources to make Islam relevant. Ghazali was a product of this milieu who expanded on these ideas and enriched the Islamic thought tremendously. Ghazali, I had the great honor of, translating for Muhammad al-Ghazali when I was in McGill. He came to Montreal as Yusuf al-Qaradawi came and Muhammad Ayub came, and I was called by the Saudi consular uh, uh, general, uh, invited to translate his lectures. Alhamdulillah, I was very, very inspired. I have been inspired by this great personality. I have been reading his works. I continue to read them and get motivated. Ghazali's name was Muhammad al-Ghazali, as-Sakha. He is commonly known as Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali. He was born in 1917 in the small town of Nakhl al-Anab in the Bahira Governorate in Egypt, Alexandria. His father was a man of modest means. He was a merchant. He had a dukan, he has a grocery store, and he was a devout person, just like most of these people. They have been influenced by the Sufi, and that's a great thing. Sufi training, the spiritual training that these people were exposed to really helped to bring up a lot of Muslim intellectuals, uh, giving them sound spiritual foundation. So his father had a vision of Imam Ghazali. He appeared to him in a dream, and Imam Ghazali foretold him the birth of a son and told him to name him after him, hence his name Ghazali. And of course, his father so also decided, of course, he made sure that all of his children receive proper training and education, as he had no such opportunity, but he wanted to make sure, especially this one, received the proper training to be like his namesake, Imam Ghazali, Rahmatullahi alayhi. Imam Muhammad al-Ghazali's formal education began in the traditional manner, memorized the Quran at age 10, and of course, for them, because Quran is in the Arabic language, even though they have memorized it, they will not stop there. They will continue to study the Quran in deeper and deeper in all of the courses were continued, because step by step they are exposed to the inner beauty of the Quran, the depth of the Quran. So, but Muhammad al-Ghazali said from the time He memorized the Quran. Quran became his trusted companion and an enduring source of abiding source of inspiration for him. He would recite the verses of the Quran, and the tears will flow. Any mention of even the name of Allah, name of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tears would automatically flow because he was deeply, Quran moved him. The seerah of the Prophet moved him. The traditions moved him. After completing his secondary education, he joined Al Azhar in 1937. He studied under eminent scholars. There are a number of them, but he mentions these three because they had exceptional moral character and they're extremely kind hearted. They were true role models of sincerity and devotion and the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is something that touched the heart of Muhammad al Ghazali. It was so He graduated in 1941 and completed the higher specialization in Dawa. Of course, he got his master's in Dawa. So he is also known one of the best name, one of the term people use to refer to him is, among others, a Da'iya, the Da'iya par excellence, who specialized in communicating the message of Islam in the modern world in a way that is relevant, that moves the hearts of the people, faced as they are with the modern day challenges. Ghazali became attracted to Ikhwan al Muslimun. This is one of the greatest brother movement. Inshallah, we will study when we come back in September. Hassan al Banna, Imam Hassan al Banna. So he was attracted to Ikhwan al Muslimun, the Muslim Brotherhood movement. Unfortunately, this movement has so many critics. They don't objectively look at this movement. It's just like somebody, Muhammad al-Ghazali said, somebody wrote a book about India, all the evils and bad things about India. This book was given to a man from India, an intellectual. He said, this is the writing of a street cleaner in India because he is only exposed to the dirt and filth all his life. That is his business. So, in other words, a person looking at Ikhwan al Muslimun and criticizing them for some of their extreme, the people who represented them, their, missteps or corruption or violence or whatever done in the name of Ikhwan, and then blame the entire movement for it. So it's just like that. Referring to his first meeting with Imam Hassan al-Banna, the founder of Ikhwan, he was doing his homework in a mosque. He used to attend regularly and he would sit there and study, do his homework. But then after Asr prayer, he saw a young man, very lively, very energetic, standing up, explaining the beautiful hadith, ittaqillah haythuma kunt, watabi sayyir hasana tamha wa khaliq an-nas bi khuluqin hasan. I heard him delivering a brief talk explaining the hadith, be mindful of Allah always. It was so inspiring and touched the hearts. Since then, I developed a close relationship with this great man and joined him in the struggle for the revival of Islam until Hassan al-Banna was martyred in 1949. Hassan al-Banna recognized the divine endowment of Ghazali because Muhammad al-Ghazali started writing articles even when he was in the in the high school, I think. So when Hassan al-Banna read his article, he wrote back to him, this is the way to write. And he recognized that this man has a genius. He is a genius and highly effective communicator and da'iyah. And he encouraged him to use his pen and tongue to promote the cause of Islam. Ghazali also wrote that from early years he became an avid reader of books of diverse disciplines. That's why his book is very, very articulate. It's at once intellectual and spiritual. It addresses you as a man of reason, a man of heart. It appeals to reason as well as heart and common sense. He was a master of letters, actually, both fiction and non-fiction. Writing was very precise, very articulate, very eloquent. Thanks to this, he became a talented writer and speaker. His career started as an imam and khatib in the Mosque of Al Azhar. His sermons would attract thousands to the masjid. Then, of course, from there he moved to become to khatib in Masjid Amr bin al-As. And the moment people heard the news that he is now khatib of Masjid Amr bin al-As, one of the famous masjids in Cairo, thousands, 15,000 people at a time would listen to him giving sermons. Moving on, then of course he also became supervisor and later the director of Department of Training of Imams and Preachers. From 1971, he also served as a professor at both King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah and later Al Qura University in Mecca and University of Qatar and dean and director of curriculum. Of course, he was a rector, I was told, of Amir Abdul Aziz Abdul Qadir University in Algeria, one of the famous universities. His work in Algeria took a heavy toll. Actually, scholars after scholars mentioned his immense contributions, his influence, his impact on the people of all over the world. Actually, and Algerians especially remembered his but his life is, you know, he was a man devoted to his work. He would not rest. Actually, heavy toll on his health, which forced him to return to Egypt finally. Back in Cairo, he was appointed chairman of the Academic Council of the International Institute of Islamic Thought. Actually, Triple IT has published a number of his works in translation, especially his work on thematic commentary on the Quran, and I know his work on Quran, his work on the Sunnah, and other works have been translated by Triple IT because of the contemporary, the way he has written them to appeal to intellectuals and scholars and students alike. His work as a scholar and intellectual was widely recognized all over the world, and he became recipient of many awards, including the First Order of the Republic of Egypt, 1988, the King Faisal Award in 1989, and the Excellence Awards from Pakistan and Malaysia. Of course, there are other awards he received. These are the most important awards to name in this brief session. Ghazali is a perfect exemplar of an Islamic scholar who served in several capacities. He was a person multidimensional, aspects. He was a scholar steeped in the Islamic tradition, while at the same time he is fully cognizant of the modern world and its realities. I still remember coming to uh, Toronto in 1972. I remember him, a student who was planning to come to North America for studies, went to him asking his advice. Muhammad al Ghazali, who had been to North America, advised this young student, make sure you enter North America through the gate or door of MSA. I can very well vouch for this profound advice of Muhammad al Ghazali. It was thanks to MSA, the fact that I entered North America or to Canada through the door of MSA, that I saved myself from being swept away by the agnostic milieu of the Toronto University and later McGill University. I would have been lost in this milieu. I would have been a great professor or intellectual, but without any foundation, completely deprived of my faith and in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'm thankful how great this individual was, insightful this man was. I really cannot thank him enough. A teacher and mentor who trained generations, actually, not generation, a generation of scholars in various countries. A true mujahid who fought against oppression, tyranny, exploitation, and always stood with the weak. He lived a very, very simple life, and he always stood, you know, to speak on behalf of the oppressed. He considered Daesh, and the other extremist movement as the worst enemies of Islam. He considered them worse than the external enemies you know, because they are there to present an ugly picture of Islam to repel people away from Islam. He fought against literalism. Salafis attacked him right and left because he was opposed against the literalism. And actually, I still remember him visiting North America and advising because he was told of a mosque. I think it was in New Jersey or Muslims fought among themselves over such frivolous issues, how high, where to place the hand in salah, and the size of the beard, and how high the pant should be, where the pant should, whether angle or above angle and below the knee and things like that. All these frivolous controversies, and then they fought, and the mosque was closed. Police was called in because they engaged in physical fighting, and mosque was closed. I myself also saw something like that when I visited New Jersey. So also he also warned against a trend that he noticed in North America, which is still there. He said he saw many good engineers coming to North America and suddenly becoming muftis without any training in Islam. So he said we lost some of the best engineers and scientists, and we ended up with having mediocre scholars. They have no training in fatwa or fiqh or Islamic sciences, and they stand to speak on behalf of Islam. We have people everywhere. And of course, the same is true of uh, Osama bin Laden. He was an engineer, turned to be a scholar and a mufti, speaking on behalf of Islam, calling people for jihad. We had no authority to call for jihad because nobody elected him as an amir or leader or anything. So all of these kind of trends, he critiqued them very harshly. All of his works are critical works against literalism, superstition, which actually still remember this is a trend now everywhere in the Muslim world. Suddenly a person says, I have been possessed by jinn. I have been approached by people. Muhammad al-Ghazali attacks this. This is a sign of psychosis. He said you have to go to a psychiatrist. There is no such thing. How come only Muslim the jinn attacks Muslims? It doesn't attack any other community. There is no justification for this in the Quran. Jinn possessing human beings. This is uh, this is a condition that needs treatment, scientific treatment. So this kind of so many examples like that he brings from as a reflection of the symptom, the disease of the Muslim Ummah, as we have lost the true understanding and the methodology of interpreting the sources. False interpretation of Islam he found to be contrary to the sound principles of the Quran. For him, Quran is a source that harmonizes reason and revelation, where the book of Revelation is in harmony with the book of nature. And also the traditions. He said they are not independent sources. They should be always compared with the sound principles of the Quran, and also not just checking the isnad or chain of transmission, we should also examine the text and evaluate it by the criteria of the reason and the Quranic verses or traditions that are well established and authentic. We found this to be the root. The failure to do so is the root at the root of the present Muslim crisis. Ghazali authored 70 books, many of which have been translated into various languages all over the world. He also left behind a virtual encyclopedia of Friday sermons. I have come across 5 volumes of these sermons. They are indeed very, very inspiring, very, very profound. Most of the prominent Mohi sermons you would attract, as I mentioned, thousands of worshippers. They were acclaimed as highly inspiring, persuasive, appealing to both reason and heart. Ghazali was an independent scholar and thinker who worked for the revival of Islam. His works were written in response to contemporary issues facing Islam and Muslims. He was convinced of the need for the reform in Muslim thinking. Our approach to the Quran, one of his books, كيف نتعامل مع القرآن? How do we relate to the Quran? How do we relate to the Hadith? How do we relate to fiqh? How do we relate to tasawwuf? These are methodological works. There are basic flows in our approaches of studying the Quran and studying the traditions and the way our fiqh legacy have evolved. It is high time we reread them and critically examine them. And there is something wrong with the way some people have taken tasawwuf. Tasawwuf is a great thing in Islam. It has produced geniuses, great scholars, and giants. But in our hands now, it has been reduced to a cult, producing cultic practices that full of superstitions. Other issues such as governance, Muslims have failed to produce, lasting contributions. We have at one time we have Imam Abu Yusuf and Muhammad al Hassan Shaybani. With their death, that tradition died. We did not expand on the kind of contribution these great giants made in governance in regards to the field of governance and social justice and administration and loss of marriage and divorce. He said there is a need for overhauling this thing. A man sitting in, maybe in a sleepy state, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. So the Mufti asked, how many times you uttered this word? 3 times? If you say 3 times, then the Mufti would say you are divorced from your wife and she has to move out. He said this is a mockery of the Quran, because where in the heaven the Quran deals with the divorce in this way. In the Quran, divorce had to be witnessed, documented, and it is a serious affair. Of course, there is a need for overhauling the entire system of divorce, the laws of divorce in Islam, and also the status of woman. I will bring some words from his, he has beautiful works that Islam, the sound teaching of Islam, and the antiquated traditions in regard to women prevailing in the Muslim society, and so many other works, explaining how we have been oppressing women, calling for liberation of women and restoring them to the dignified place that Islam has, placed them. For him, like Muhammad Abdu and others, of course, he comes to in the same line of reformers, the tradition of Muhammad Abdu, Rashid Riza, Hassanul Banna, and others. The Quran and the authentic prophetic tradition are the only irrefutable source of Islamic thought and life. Of course, Imams made valuable contributions, but they never thought they were infallible. He said the Quran has become in the hands of Muslims today a book read by the dead for the dead. This man was breathing his whole flesh and blood. The Quran. When he speaks, the word Quranic words come one after the other, flows, because he is pondering the Quran, reading the Quran, meditating upon the Quran. All his thoughts are molded by the worldview of the Quran. This is the beauty of this. And see the depth. When somebody is immersed in the inexhaustible depth of the Quran, how his thought becomes deep. This is one of the examples, of course, out of the intellectuals. We mentioned one thing that we have covered in this series so far. All of them were molded by the Quran. They come to it from their own backgrounds and they find the depth of Islam in the beauty of the Quran, in the miracle of the Quran. He wrote several works on the Quran, namely how to approach the Quran. كيف نتعامل مع القرآن نظرات في القرآن reflections of the Quran المحاور الخمسة في القرآن the five major themes of the Quran and then التفسير الموضوعي للقرآن. This is translated by triple IT, a thematic commentary of the Quran. Through a detailed study of the Quran, he shows that the reading of the book of Revelation according to the Quran must go hand in hand with the reading of the book of nature. He brings verses after verses from the Quran to show that we must read the Quran while pondering and observing and reflecting on the nature. Quran calls us to think, reflect upon the Quran and reflect on the nature, the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Muslim failure to engage in the Quran in this way, with the Quran in this way, has been the source of our backwardness. Profound statement he made. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. He taught Adam the names of all things. When you read this verse, Al-Quran يُفَسِّرُ بَعْضُهُ بَعْضًا. One part of the Quran explained the other. He explained this verse by bringing all of the verses which speaks about Adamic mission of man in this universe as vicegerent, and how Allah has made the whole nature subservient to human beings. So must be read in relation to his mission on the face of the earth. Relate this to the many verses that stress that Allah has made everything on the earth subservient to man. It calls upon us to use the resources of the earth for the benefit of humankind, to build a civilization. So Muslims have a role to play as builders of civilization, how to structure society, to discover, to make a contribution to science and education, empirical knowledge. Muslims have shirked this mission, and that is why we have been reduced to be at the mercy of others. We have realized the potential of the knowledge of names of things. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. Another fundamental error is our piecemeal approach. We approach the Quran as well as Hadith piecemeal. So a person reads one ayah of the Quran and runs with it. You make an entire theory, in isolation. No, that is not the way to approach the Quran, because the Quran is a consistent, a coherent document. This is the way Aisha radiallahu anha understood it. When Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu said, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, was passing by a Jewish woman who had died, and he saw the family crying. He mentioned, see, they are crying, but she is being punished in the grave. So Ibn Umar thought this punishment of this woman was because they are crying over her death. When Aisha heard it, how could Rasulullah make such a statement? When Allah says, no soul will be punished for the sin of another soul. لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. How could Rasulullah contradict the Quran? So this is a method. So don't approach the Quran or Hadith piecemeal. Study it, comparing to the entire Quran, entire Hadith, then you will have that big picture. You will understand Islam horizontally and vertically. This is in width and depth. That is what we are failing. We see how people run away with one hadith or one ayah, and of course, it doesn't make contradictory, it's irrational. So, we fail to discern the coherence of the message. So, the need is there for a thematic approach where one sees the unity of themes in the surahs. So, that is a tafsirul mawdu'i al Quran, a thematic study, tafsir of the Quran. The treatment of Quran, this kind of treatment, his treatment of the Quran brings alive the message of the Quran as a relevant modern document. As he turned his attention next to critique the Muslim understanding of the Sunnah and Hadith. He wrote a book titled The Sunnah Between the Jurists and the People of Hadith. He criticized the literal understanding of the text and the outdated interpretations on issues concerning women and gender in Islam. Examples after examples he brings stress the need for critically evaluating traditions that he said Muslims have failed. We have the distinction between they fail to make a distinction between the categorical texts with categorical meanings and texts which are isolated, which does not contain categorical meaning. They are not qat'i, they are not incontrovertible. So you cannot run after an isolated tradition to make a statement, especially if that tradition is contrary to the sound understanding of the principles of the Quran, sound understanding of common sense and human rationality and science. So it must be judged not just by chain, but also critically examine the text itself. There are traditions in the sources which is considered, it's not otherwise it is sound, but ahad, isolated traditions that Prophet Musa alayhi salam, slaps when angel Azrael comes, the angel of death comes to catch his soul. Sees his soul, he slaps the angel and blinds him. This is, and the fake story of the satanic verses, and the so-called tradition that woman, donkey, and 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 a dog, if they pass in front of the worshipper, their salah is broken. Of course, when Aisha heard this tradition, Na'udhu Billah, are you comparing us women with donkeys and dogs? I used to lie, in front of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used to pray in the same bed. I'm sleeping and I'm lying in front of him. And when it is time for him to make his sujood, he moves my leg away, feet away, for him to have a place to make sujood. So you see how these isolated traditions become irrational, contrary to the sound understanding of the Quran. But his book on, critiquing these kind of traditions, stirred up controversies. Over 2 dozen books have been now published by the so-called Salafis and literalists, some of them accusing him to be an enemy of the Sunnah, of the Hadith. Of course, all of this, these are false allegations because he was indeed a lover of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and Allah Subhanahu wa Taala blessed him to be buried, you know, between the grave of Imam Malik and the grave of the great scholar of Quran, the teacher of Malik, Imam Nafi. You see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored him. He also wrote on this, and actually a woman in Egypt had seen a dream of Muhammad al-Ghazali dying, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam holding his right hand, Bilal his left hand, and leading him. He also wrote on the status of women in Islam and dedicated an independent work titled Women in Islam and Antiquated Customs. Some of his major works focus focused on analyzing the causes of stagnation and negativity and how to awaken the Muslim spirit to achieve excellence. One of them is titled Islam and the Wasted Talents. He was opposed to blind imitation in theology and jurisprudence. He was a vocal critic of hero worship and dictatorship and considered them as causes of Muslim decline. Although he was very active in the Muslim Brotherhood and he was in jail for a number of years, later on he left the movement, still cherishing love for the main mission itself, but the method he disagreed with them in their methodology, extreme, political involvement. Like Muhammad Abdu, Muhammad Abdu differed with Afghani. Afghani was more a revolutionary politician, but Abdu thought that was not the way to reform the society. He stressed the need for spiritual and moral training from the bottom up. His works and speeches were highly creative and full of insight. They were a far cry from the ideas and lessons imparted by traditional scholars and preachers. He was widely read. Unlike some of his works have been published in so many editions, many of them, and still being read. Acutely aware of the state of the world and the challenges facing Muslims, he actively defended Islam until his last breath. You know how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, when Allah chooses a person for his honor, he will seal life with good work. And also when when your last word is the testimony of La ilaha illallah, it's a sign that you are a person of paradise. This happened to him. He took part in a seminar on Islam and the modern world in Riyadh. And of course, the speaker stood up, and he was analyzing the works of Ghazali, Muhammad al-Ghazali, and accused him of being an enemy of Sunnah because he was critical of the Muslim approach to the Sunnah and the traditions. So Ghazali stood up to defend that he is indeed a lover of Rasulullah. Even the mention of the name of Rasulullah would bring tears to his eyes. That was how much he loved Rasulullah. So he said his sole goal in life has been to raise aloft the word La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. Uttering these words, he sat down and surrendered his soul. He died in Riyadh and buried in Jannatul Baqi in Medina, according to his family and friends, tell us that his last testament he wrote, he should be buried in Jannatul Baqi. He did so while spending his last years in Cairo. He had returned to Cairo because of ill health, and that was where he decided to spend his last day. And at the same time, he had the wasiya always in his pocket that he should be buried in Jannatul Baqi. So the family and friends and the physician who is to examine, they said this is a vain dream, wishful dream he has. How can he be buried in Jannatul Baqi when he's living in Egypt? Then suddenly he got an invitation to take part in a conference in Riyadh. His physician, his family, and friends advised him against traveling because of deteriorating health. But he insisted that he must travel because it was Allah's will to facilitate his wish to be buried in Medina, the city of the Prophet, whose very name filled his eyes with tears. And um, the the person who accompanied his janaza says planes flew from all over the world to Medina, landed in Medina. Scholars and dignitaries from all over the world, the entire masjid from the masjid to the Jannatul Baqi flowing with worshippers attending his funeral. And the person digging a grave for him, he could not find any place that will allow him to dig. Finally, he reached one spot where he was able to dig, and he realized that is between the grave of Imam Malik and the grave of his teacher, the great scholar of Quran, Nafi. You know, so you see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered him to be buried between these two giants. Consider the oppression of woman as great blemish, disfiguring Islam in the minds of people. He ruled that niqab had no place in Islam, that it blocks women from participating fully in society. He said Islam calls for women's right to participate in all aspects of life while not neglecting her duties as a mother and nurturer. He was recognized as one of the greatest scholars of this century, influencing generations of Muslims. Sheikh Karalawi, one of his students, referred to him as a great thinker and imam who left a lasting legacy, a school of comprehensive reform which ought to be studied by scholars and students alike. Imam Abdullah Ali Mahmud, the Sheikh of Azhar at the time, said, "We have only two Ghazalis in Islam. One, the living one, because when he was saying this, Muhammad al-Ghazali was alive, and the other was the author of Ihya, Imam Ghazali." Now let's see some of the deep, of course. His works are full of wisdom. They deserve repeated reading and study. I wish our scholars study his works deeply, repeatedly, as often as they can. Islam is a religion of justice and mercy, and whoever thinks it commands the enslavement of one's wife when crushing her dignity is fabricating lies in the name of Allah and His Messenger. What a profound statement. A spouse, a husband's oppression of his spouse or her spouse, a spouse oppression of his or her spouse is a deeper corruption and a faster road to catastrophe than a ruler's oppression of his subjects. See, this is diagnosing the state of this ummah, the condition, the poor state. It is without doubt that humanity flies with two wings, man and woman. And the breaking of one of the wings means that it comes to a stop and descends, cannot proceed any further. The spread of kufr, of active rejection of God in the world, has half of its responsibility upon religious people who have made God ugly in the eyes of His creation with their ugly behavior and speech. So it's our character that should reflect the beauty of Allah, beauty of religion. But our character is ugly. So we think this is God is ugly. This is why we cannot blame people if they have been repelled from Islam because of our own character. I do not fear for the person who thinks, even if he loses his way, for he will return to the truth eventually. Rather, I fear for the person who doesn't think, even if he is correctly guided, for he will be like a wisp of straw at the mercy of the wind. Anytime he may lose his faith because it's not based on sound thinking. Taking a lesson in nature or chemistry is equivalent to humble prayer. Taking a tour of astronomy is equivalent to glorifying and praising Allah. And a trip through the beautiful farms and blossoming gardens, or a similar trip through factories filled with fuel powered movement and production, is a goodly connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What a beautiful statement. Is trying to reform the understanding of Muslims. If a Muslim spends his life standing beside the Kaaba, oblivious to what the future of Islam requires of scientific and economic and military struggle, it will not help him the least in the sight of Allah. The building of factories is equal in virtue to the building of mosques. It's a servant's duty to plan good deeds, and Allah will make them grow. A person never planted an apple for Allah to make an onion grow for him. You never get except what you planned. So plant something good so that you can reap a good harvest. Will Mosque ever become a force for the creation of men again as it had been in the time of Rasulullah and the Khulafa Rashidin? I remain committed to my stance that the difficult task is changing society. As for changing governments, it happens automatically when society wants it. This is a realization he came to after he had joined Ikhwan and then left it because of this fundamental difference with them. There is an equation that every Arab should memorize by heart. Arabs minus Islam means zero. There is nothing, no value for them. Man has free will in the things he has knowledge about, but is pushed forward by other forces in the things he doesn't know of. His freedom increases whenever his knowledge increases. The Quran, in pointing to God's existence, is a universe that speaks, the same way that this universe is a silent Quran. I want to say to all Muslims, your Quran is your primary source for true beliefs, and the sciences of the cosmos and life are interpreters that deserve pondering and pursuing. The greatness of the deity shines more in the age of science. Scientific advance is the friend of faith and enemy of atheism. The two rakas of prayer can serve the future of one's children. For Abdullah bin Masud used to pray during the night while his little ones was sleeping, and he would look at him and say, "For your sake, my son," and he would cry and recite his words, Allah's words. And their father was a righteous man. I want to warn every Muslim of those who claim to belong to science while having no relation with it. Freud or Durkheim are not scientists. They are sick thinkers who have lost their way. And Marx and his followers are not scientists. They are modern shamans and fortune tellers suffering from mental illness. This is a message he gave to the so called liberal intellectuals who were running after the so-called scientists and thinkers. They would not have been able to gain fame and power except due to the vacuum created by the negligence of the religious. Finally, to his critic, he says, Jesus, peace be upon him, passed by a group of Jews who spoke ill of him. Jesus, peace upon him, replied in a good and kind manner to them. Then somebody said to him, "They are speaking evil words to you, and you say only good words to them." Jesus, peace be upon him, replied, "Everyone spends from what he has. So no need to worry about those who speak ill of us, as long as we are sure we are treading the straight path." أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. Brothers and sisters, this is the last in this series for this semester, inshallah. We have left Aisha bint Shati, inshallah. We will resume in September and start with her and study Hassan al-Banna, Maududi, Abul Hassan al-Nadawi, Badiu Zaman, Saeed Nursi, and many others left, inshallah. Join me because study of these thinkers and personalities is bound to inspire us, inshallah, and to increase, enhance our understanding and practice of Islam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honor us to spend our lives serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with sincerity and devotion. And may Allah accept all of our good deeds and forgive our mistakes. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I will see you in September, inshallah, back, God willing. Assalamu alaikum.